You don't fix a broken life with money. You fix it with presence, the man said quietly, even as the crowd behind him laughed under their breath, not knowing that within minutes, that same space would fall into a silence none of them would ever forget. It was a cold Thursday evening just outside a modest community center on the edge of a worn-down Midwestern town, the kind of place where flickering streetlights buzzed overhead and the scent of motor oil drifted in from a nearby auto shop, and where dignity often had to survive without applause. Daniel Reeves stood near the curb, his flannel jacket slightly frayed at the sleeves, his hands rough from years of hourly labor, and his eyes carrying that steady calm only life's hardest storms could carve into a man. A single father for nearly 7 years, Daniel had learned to live quietly, to endure without complaint, and to give without expectation, raising his 8-year-old son in a small 2-bedroom rental where every dollar was stretched and every moment mattered. He wasn't a man people noticed, not at first glance, not in a world that often measured worth by status or noise, but there was something about the way he moved, slow, deliberate, grounded, like someone who had already fought battles no one else could see and had chosen kindness anyway. That evening, he wasn't there for himself. He was there because of a small flyer taped to a gas station window, a local fundraiser for children with disabilities, something simple, something most people would scroll past, but not Daniel, not a man who understood what it meant to carry quiet pain behind a calm face. Across the parking lot, partially shielded by a folding chair and a worn-out blanket, sat a young girl in a wheelchair, no older than 10, her legs thin and unmoving beneath her, her fingers curled slightly inward, as if holding on to something invisible, and her eyes, wide but tired, scanning the world like it had already disappointed her more times than she could count. Her name was Lily, though few people there knew it, and fewer still knew the long hospital corridors, the whispered diagnoses, and the countless nights her mother had spent holding her hand, while machines hummed in the dark. To most, she was just another child in a chair, another story in a long line of quiet struggles. But to Daniel, she was something else entirely, a reflection of fragility wrapped in courage, a reminder that some battles didn't shout, they endured. What he didn't see, what no one there noticed, was the black SUV parked just across the street, engine idling softly, windows tinted just enough to conceal the woman inside, her posture straight, her expression unreadable, her eyes locked on the scene with a focus that carried both control and something far more human beneath it. She wasn't there by accident, and she wasn't just watching a fundraiser. She was watching him. Inside that vehicle sat Evelyn Carter, a billionaire whose name moved markets and whose decisions shaped industries. But in that moment, none of that power mattered, because the only thing that held her attention was the quiet man kneeling beside her daughter, speaking gently, as if the world had finally slowed down just for her. Daniel didn't know who Lily's mother was, didn't know about the private doctors, the global connections, or the fortune that could have rewritten his entire life overnight. And he certainly didn't know that every small gesture he was about to make was being seen, measured, and remembered by someone who had everything except the one thing money had never been able to guarantee, a miracle. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the faint sound of laughter from a group nearby. But Daniel didn't turn, didn't react. He simply knelt lower, meeting Lily at eye level, his voice soft, steady, and certain, as if he already understood something the rest of the world was still too loud to hear. And in that quiet moment, something began to change, something no one could name yet, but something that would soon leave an entire room without a single word to say. "Can you feel your toes right now?" Daniel asked gently, his voice low enough to stay between them, but steady enough to carry something deeper than the question itself. And for a moment, Lily didn't answer, her small fingers tightening slightly around the edge of her blanket as the faint hum of traffic and distant chatter filled the space around them. She shook her head slowly. "Not really," she whispered, her voice thin but honest, the kind of honesty that didn't try to impress, didn't try to hide, just existed. Daniel nodded once, not surprised, not pitying, just present. "That's okay," he said, his tone calm, almost reassuring in a way that felt unfamiliar in a place like this. "Sometimes the body takes its time, but that doesn't mean it's done trying." Behind them, a few people glanced over, some curious, others dismissive, their attention drifting in and out like passing wind. But Daniel didn't look up, didn't shift, didn't let the outside world interrupt what was happening in that quiet circle between him and the girl. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, creased from being opened too many times, and carefully, he placed it in her hands. "What's this?" Lily asked, her brows knitting slightly as she looked down. "A map," Daniel said simply. She blinked. "A map to where?" He gave a faint smile, not wide, not performative, just real. "To the places your body hasn't gone yet." She looked up at him then, confusion mixing with something softer, something almost like hope. "I don't think my legs work like that," she said quietly. Daniel didn't interrupt her. He let the words settle, let the truth of her experience breathe for a second before he spoke again. "Maybe not today," he said, his voice even. "But I've seen things change before, not fast, not loud, but steady, like a whisper that keeps going until it becomes a voice." The wind brushed past them again, lifting a loose strand of Lily's hair as Daniel gently tapped the paper in her hands. "Every day, you try something small. Wiggle a toe, imagine a step, tell your body where you want to go. It might not listen right away, but it hears you." A pause stretched between them, soft but full. Then Lily looked back down at the paper, unfolding it carefully, revealing a simple drawing, uneven lines forming what looked like a path, starting from a small stick figure in a wheelchair and leading toward another standing upright, arms raised. No labels, no instructions, just a direction. "You made this?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "A while ago." "For who?" she pressed. He hesitated, just briefly. "For someone who needed to believe again." Across the street, inside the darkened SUV, Evelyn Carter leaned forward slightly, her fingers resting against the edge of the seat, her usual composure cracking just enough to let something unfamiliar rise beneath it. She had seen the best doctors, funded the most advanced research, flown Lily across states, across countries, chasing answers that always seemed just out of reach. And yet here, in a parking lot she would normally drive past without a glance, a man with worn sleeves and quiet eyes was offering something none of her resources had ever truly delivered. Not a cure, not a guarantee, but belief, steady and unshaken. Back on the curb, Daniel shifted slightly, lowering himself so he was fully at Lily's level now. "Can I try something?" he asked. She looked at him, uncertain, but nodded. Carefully, gently, he placed his hand just above her ankle, not pressing, not forcing, just resting there like a signal rather than an action. "Don't think about moving everything," he said softly. "Just one thing. One tiny thing." Lily swallowed, her gaze dropping to her legs, her breath shallow but focused. Seconds passed, then more. The world around them kept moving, people talking, cars passing, laughter rising and fading, but inside that small space, time slowed. And then, almost too small to notice, her smallest toe twitched. It was barely there, barely visible, but it happened. Lily's eyes widened. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Daniel didn't react loudly, didn't celebrate, didn't break the moment. He just nodded once, his voice calm but certain. "Yeah," he said. "I did." And across the street, inside the quiet shadow of tinted glass, a woman who had built an empire felt her breath catch for the first time in years. "Easy," a small voice said from behind, soft but steady, carrying a kind of quiet confidence that didn't belong to a child who had seen so little of the world, and Daniel didn't have to turn to know who it was, because he recognized that voice. The same way he recognized his own heartbeat. "She's doing it. Dad, don't rush her." Daniel glanced back just slightly, enough to see his son standing a few feet away near the edge of the curb, hands tucked into the pockets of an oversized hoodie, his sneakers worn at the edges, his posture relaxed but attentive. Ethan Reeves was 9 years old, thin, observant, and far quieter than most boys his age, the kind of child who didn't interrupt moments, only stepped into them when it mattered. He had been watching the entire time, unnoticed by most, just like his father often was. But there was nothing accidental about his presence, because Ethan had grown up in a home where silence wasn't empty, it was understanding. Daniel gave a small nod, then turned back to Lily, keeping his hand gently in place above her ankle. "He's right," Daniel said calmly. "No rushing." Lily looked between them, her eyes flickering with something new now, not just surprise, but connection. as if she had suddenly stepped into a space where she wasn't alone anymore. "You have a son?" she asked softly. Daniel allowed the faintest hint of a smile. "Yeah," he said. "He's the one who keeps me honest." Ethan shrugged slightly, stepping closer now, crouching down beside them without hesitation, his gaze settling on Lily's foot with quiet focus. "You felt it, didn't you?" he asked, not as a challenge, but as a certainty. Lily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. It moved, just a little. Ethan's expression didn't explode with excitement, didn't draw attention. He simply nodded back, like it was exactly what he expected. "That's how it starts," he said. "Small doesn't mean nothing. Small means it's beginning." The words landed differently, coming from him, simple but grounded in a way that made them harder to dismiss. Daniel watched his son for a brief moment, something unspoken passing between them, pride without show, understanding without explanation, the kind of bond that had been built not through ease, but through years of shared quiet battles. Back inside the SUV, Evelyn Carter's eyes shifted slightly, now taking in the boy as well, her gaze sharpening not with judgment, but with curiosity. She had spent her life surrounded by polished conversations, rehearsed empathy, people who knew how to say the right thing at the right time, but what she was witnessing now was something else entirely, something untrained, unfiltered, and undeniably real. Two people who had nothing, offering something she couldn't buy. On the curb, Lily's fingers tightened around the paper map again, her breathing steadier now, her focus anchored. "Can I try again?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked, measuring not her ability, but her readiness. Then he nodded once. "Go ahead." The air seemed to hold its breath again, the noise of the fundraiser fading into the background as Lily concentrated, her small frame tensing slightly, her eyes locked on her own foot like it was the center of her world. Seconds stretched. Then again, the slightest movement, a tremble, a twitch, small but undeniable. This time, Ethan leaned back just slightly, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Told you," he murmured. Daniel exhaled slowly, not in relief, not in surprise, but in recognition, as if something he had always believed was quietly proving itself. "You see," he said gently to Lily, "your body hears you." And for the first time that evening, Lily smiled, not wide, not loud, but real, the kind of smile that didn't need permission, didn't wait for approval, it simply arrived. Across the street, Evelyn's hand tightened slightly against the leather seat, her composure slipping just enough to reveal the truth she had been holding back, because in that moment, watching her daughter smile in a way she hadn't in years, she realized something that no report, no diagnosis, no expert had ever been able to give her. This wasn't just progress. It was something far more dangerous to ignore. It was hope. "Hope is dangerous." A man's voice cut in from behind them, sharp, dismissive, and just loud enough to turn a few heads, especially when it comes from people who don't know what they're doing. The moment fractured slightly, the quiet bubble around Daniel, Ethan, and Lily rippling as a well-dressed man stepped closer, his polished shoes out of place against the cracked pavement, his pressed coat catching the yellow glow of the streetlight. He carried himself with the kind of authority that came from credentials, not experience, and his eyes moved quickly, assessing, skeptical. "You shouldn't be encouraging this," he continued, glancing briefly at Lily's wheelchair before settling his gaze on Daniel. "False progress can be more harmful than no progress at all." A few nearby attendees shifted, drawn in by the tension, their earlier indifference replaced with curiosity, the kind that waited to see who would be right. Daniel didn't stand, didn't react with offense. He simply looked up, calm, grounded, his voice even when he spoke. "I didn't promise anything," he said. "I just asked her to try." The man exhaled through his nose, unimpressed. "And what exactly qualifies you to guide a neurological case?" he pressed, his tone sharpening slightly. "Do you have medical training? Certification? Anything beyond good intentions?" Ethan's posture stiffened slightly, but he didn't speak, his eyes flicking to his father, waiting, trusting. Lily looked between them, her earlier confidence wavering just a fraction under the weight of the man's words. Daniel noticed. He always noticed. He shifted just enough so he was back at Lily's level, his presence steady, anchoring. "What matters right now," Daniel said quietly, not even looking at the man, "is what she felt. not what you believe about it. The man scoffed lightly. Feeling is not function, he replied. I've seen dozens of cases like this. Temporary nerve responses, nothing more. It doesn't mean she's improving. A pause followed, the kind that stretched tension thin. Then Daniel nodded once. Maybe, he said simply. No argument. No pushback. Just acknowledgement. It disarmed the moment slightly, but didn't end it. But she tried, Daniel added, his voice still calm, still controlled. And she did something she didn't think she could do 10 minutes ago. He finally looked up then, meeting the man's eyes, not with defiance, but with something steadier. That matters too. The air shifted again, quieter this time, less about confrontation, more about something harder to dismiss. The man hesitated, just briefly, then shook his head. Be careful, he muttered, stepping back slightly. People like her don't need stories. They need solutions. He turned and walked off, his presence fading as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. Ethan exhaled slowly. He didn't see it, he said under his breath. Daniel gave a small shake of his head. He saw what he knows, he replied. Lily looked down at her foot again, her fingers tightening slightly around the paper. What if he's right? She asked quietly, the doubt slipping back in, fragile but real. Daniel didn't rush to answer. He let the question exist for a second, then leaned in just slightly. Then we'll find out, he said. Not by stopping, by continuing. Across the street, inside the SUV, Evelyn Carter's jaw tightened, her gaze following the man as he disappeared into the crowd. She knew that tone. She had heard it in boardrooms, in hospitals, in conversations where certainty often came at the cost of compassion. But what unsettled her wasn't the interruption. It was Daniel's response to it. No ego, no need to prove, just quiet conviction. Her attention shifted back to Lily, to the way her daughter's shoulders slowly relaxed again, to the way that small spark hadn't disappeared, only flickered. Back on the curb, Daniel removed his hand gently from Lily's ankle, not as an ending, but as a pause. That was enough for today, he said softly. Lily looked up, surprised. That's it, she asked. He nodded. Progress isn't loud, he said. It's consistent. Ethan stood up slowly, brushing his hands against his jeans. We'll come back tomorrow, he added, like it wasn't even a question. Daniel glanced at him, then back at Lily. If you want, he said. Lily hesitated, then nodded, a small but certain movement. I do. And across the street, a woman who had spent years searching for answers felt something unfamiliar settle into place. Not certainty, not control, but something far more powerful, a decision forming quietly in the space between what she had always known and what she had just witnessed. Tomorrow only matters if you show up for it, Daniel said as he rose slowly from the curb, his knees stiff from the cold pavement, his voice calm, but carrying the kind of weight that didn't need to be loud to be heard. And Lily looked up at him like she was trying to hold on to every word before it could disappear. The crowd around them had begun to thin, folding chairs scraping lightly against the asphalt, distant conversations fading into the hum of the evening. But something had shifted in that small corner of the lot, something quieter than attention but stronger than doubt. Ethan stepped closer to his father, glancing once more at Lily before pulling his hoodie tighter around himself. We'll bring the notebook, he said casually, like it was already part of a plan that had been decided long ago. Lily tilted her head slightly. What notebook? She asked. Ethan looked at Daniel, then back at her. The one where we track things, he explained. Small things. Stuff people don't think matters, until it does. Daniel gave a faint nod, not correcting him, not adding more, just letting the simplicity stand. He started it, Daniel said, his tone soft with a quiet kind of pride. Back when things got hard. Ethan shrugged slightly, uncomfortable with the attention but not denying it. You forget progress if you don't write it down, he muttered. Lily looked down at the paper map in her hands, then back at them, something settling in her expression, not certainty, not yet, but willingness. Okay, she said quietly. I'll try again tomorrow. Across the street, inside the still idling SUV, Evelyn Carter closed her eyes for a brief second, her fingers pressing lightly against her temple as if grounding herself in a moment she couldn't fully control. For years, she had structured every outcome, every risk, every variable, building a life where uncertainty was something to eliminate, not accept. But now she was watching her daughter step into something unpredictable, something fragile, something she couldn't command or purchase or guarantee. And for the first time, she didn't move to stop it. Back on the curb, Daniel reached into his pocket again, pulling out a small folded bill, not much, just enough for something warm, and handed it gently to the volunteer at the nearby table. For her, he said quietly, nodding toward Lily without making it a moment. The volunteer blinked, surprised, then nodded back, accepting it with a soft thank you. Ethan noticed, of course he did, but he didn't comment, didn't question, because he had seen that gesture before, many times, in different forms, always quiet, always without expectation. You didn't have to do that, Ethan said as they stepped away from the curb, his voice low but not disapproving. Daniel glanced at him, a faint smile forming. I know, he replied. That's why it matters. They walked side by side toward the dimly lit street, their steps unhurried, the night air cooler now, carrying the scent of distant rain and worn pavement, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan looked up slightly. You think she'll keep trying? He asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked back once, just briefly, catching a glimpse of Lily still holding the paper, still sitting there, but not the same as before. Then he turned forward again. I think she already did, he said. Behind them, unnoticed, the SUV door opened with a soft click, and a woman who had built her life on control stepped out into uncertainty, her heels quiet against the pavement as she took her first step toward the one thing she had never been able to secure, not with power, not with wealth, but only with trust. Ma'am, the event is closing. A volunteer's voice said gently, not recognizing who she was, only seeing a woman stepping out of a dark SUV into a space that had already begun to empty. But Evelyn Carter didn't respond right away, her eyes fixed ahead, steady, focused, as if every step she took now carried more weight than any boardroom decision she had ever made. The pavement felt different beneath her heels, uneven, real, not polished marble or executive flooring, and the faint hum of generators and folding tables being packed away created a backdrop that felt almost too ordinary for a moment this significant. She wasn't here as a billionaire. She was here as a mother. Across the lot, Daniel and Ethan had nearly reached the edge of the street when Ethan slowed slightly, his gaze shifting back instinctively, the way it always did when something unfinished lingered in the air. Dad? He said quietly, not urgent, just aware. Daniel followed his son's line of sight and saw her, a woman walking toward them with composed steps, her posture controlled, but her expression carrying something harder to define. He didn't recognize her, not her face, not her name, not the world she came from, but he recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same look he had seen in hospital hallways, in late-night conversations, in people who had run out of answers, but not out of hope. He stopped walking. Ethan stayed beside him, silent. Evelyn closed the distance between them, her breath steady but her thoughts anything but, and when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, measured, but softer than she was used to hearing it. You were with her, she said. Not a question, a statement. Daniel nodded once. Yeah, he replied simply. A brief silence followed, the kind that wasn't empty, but searching. Evelyn studied him for a moment, taking in the worn jacket, the quiet stance, the absence of any need to impress. You got her to move, she said, her tone careful now, as if saying it out loud might make it disappear. Daniel shook his head slightly. She moved, he corrected. I just asked her to try. Ethan glanced up at his father again, that same quiet understanding passing between them, before his attention returned to the woman in front of them. Evelyn's gaze flickered briefly to the boy, then back to Daniel. Do you know what she's been through? She asked, not defensively, but with a weight that suggested years of unanswered questions behind it. Daniel didn't rush to respond. Not everything, he said. Just enough to know she hasn't stopped fighting. That answer landed differently than anything she had heard before. Not clinical, not analytical, just human. The wind shifted slightly, brushing past them, carrying the last echoes of the evening as the parking lot grew quieter by the second. Evelyn took a small breath. I've taken her to the best specialists in the country, she said, her voice steady but thinner now. The edge of control beginning to soften. Neurologists, therapists, experimental programs, all of it. A pause. Nothing changed. Daniel listened without interruption, his expression unchanged, not dismissing, not reacting, just present. Then he nodded once. That doesn't mean nothing can, he said. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't a promise. It was something in between. Evelyn held his gaze for a second longer than she expected to, searching for something, doubt, arrogance, anything she could measure, but she didn't find it. What she found instead unsettled her more. Quiet certainty. Ethan shifted slightly, stepping forward just enough to be seen, his voice calm. She's going to try again tomorrow, he said. Evelyn looked at him, then back at Daniel. Tomorrow, she repeated softly, as if the word itself carried unfamiliar risk. Daniel nodded. If she wants to. Another pause stretched between them, softer now, less guarded. Then Evelyn made a decision, not announced, not negotiated, just chosen. We'll be here, she said. And for the first time in a long time, it wasn't a statement of control. It was a step into trust. Trust isn't built in a moment, Daniel said quietly as the night settled deeper around them, the streetlights flickering to full strength and casting long shadows across the pavement. It's built in what you choose to do next. Evelyn didn't respond right away, but her eyes didn't leave his, as if she was measuring not his words, but the space between them, the silence where intention either held or fell apart. Ethan shifted slightly beside his father, his hands still tucked into his hoodie, but his attention fully present, studying her the same way he studied everything, not with suspicion, but with careful awareness. He had seen people like this before, not in wealth, but in distance, adults who carried too much control to easily let it go. We'll bring the notebook, Ethan added again, softer this time, like a reminder more than a plan. Evelyn glanced down at him, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. You write things down? She asked. Ethan nodded. So we don't forget what matters, he said simply. Daniel looked at his son for a brief second, something warm passing through his expression before he returned his attention to Evelyn. It helps us see progress, Daniel said, even when it's small. Evelyn let out a slow breath, her posture easing just slightly. Though the weight she carried didn't disappear, it only shifted. You really believe this can change something, she said, not as a challenge, but as a realization forming out loud. Daniel didn't hesitate. I believe she can, he replied. No exaggeration. No promise beyond that. Just belief placed where it belonged. The wind moved again, cooler now, brushing past them as the last of the volunteers packed away tables in the background, their voices distant, fading. Evelyn looked past Daniel briefly, her eyes finding Lily across the lot, still seated, still holding that folded paper like it was something fragile and important at the same time. Then she looked back. If this doesn't work, she began, her voice tightening slightly, the old instinct to control outcomes creeping back in. Daniel didn't let her finish, not by interrupting loudly, but by answering before the fear could take shape. Then we keep showing up, he said. The simplicity of it hung in the air, steady, unshaken. Ethan nodded once, like it was obvious. That's what we do, he added. Evelyn blinked, the words settling somewhere deeper than she expected, because they didn't come with conditions, didn't depend on results. They existed on something else entirely. Commitment. She looked at them both now, father and son, standing side by side. Worn clothes, quiet presence. Nothing about them impressive by the standards she had lived by. And yet something about them felt more grounded than anything she had built her life around. What's your name? She asked finally, her voice softer than before. Daniel, he said. He didn't offer more. He didn't ask hers. Ethan glanced up at him, then back at her. I'm Ethan, he added. Evelyn gave a small nod, absorbing it, holding on to it. Evelyn, she said after a brief pause, the name landing without explanation, without status attached to it, just a name. Daniel nodded once in return, nothing more. No recognition, no reaction, just acknowledgement. And for the first time in a very long time, Evelyn stood in front of someone who didn't see her title, didn't measure her worth, didn't adjust their tone or posture based on what she owned. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest. Then Ethan shifted slightly, glancing back toward Lily again. She's watching us, he said quietly. Evelyn turned her head, following his gaze, and saw her daughter looking in their direction, not confused, not distant, but present, engaged in a way she hadn't been in years. Something in Evelyn's chest tightened, not painfully, but enough to remind her what was at stake. She turned back to Daniel. Tomorrow, she said again, this time more certain. Daniel nodded. Tomorrow. And as they stood there for one last moment before parting, something invisible but undeniable settled between them. Not agreement, not certainty, but a quiet understanding that whatever came next wouldn't be decided by money, titles, or fear, but by whether they chose, again and again, to show up. The real test isn't what happens in a moment, Daniel said quietly as they began to part ways, his voice steady beneath the low hum of the night. It's what you choose when no one's watching. Evelyn paused at that, her hand resting lightly against the open door of the SUV, her eyes shifting back to him, then to Ethan, then across the lot to Lily, as if trying to understand how something so simple could feel so unfamiliar. The parking lot was nearly empty now, the last folding table being carried away, the lights dimming one by one, leaving behind pockets of shadow and silence that felt almost sacred. Ethan stepped slightly ahead of his father, then turned back, walking a few steps in reverse as he looked toward Evelyn again. "We come early," he said, his tone casual but intentional. "Before it gets loud." Evelyn nodded slowly, absorbing that detail like it mattered more than it should. "We'll be here," she replied again, but this time it sounded less like a decision and more like a promise she was making to herself. Daniel gave a small nod, then placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder, guiding him toward the street. They didn't rush. They never did. Their steps were measured, unbothered by time, as if they understood something most people forgot, that what mattered didn't need to be hurried. As they walked, Ethan glanced up at his father. "You think she'll really come?" he asked. Daniel looked ahead, the dim glow of a street lamp catching the edge of his face. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I think she will." Ethan nodded, satisfied, then kicked lightly at a loose pebble on the ground, watching it skip forward before settling. "She looked different," he added. Daniel glanced down at him briefly. "How?" Ethan shrugged, like she wasn't in charge anymore. Daniel's expression softened slightly, not amused, but understanding. "Sometimes that's the only way something real can start," he said. Behind them, Evelyn remained standing beside the SUV longer than she intended, her driver waiting silently inside, not interrupting, not asking questions, because even he could sense that this moment wasn't like the others. She looked across the lot again, this time at Lily, who was now being gently helped by a volunteer, but her eyes kept drifting back toward where Daniel and Ethan had stood. The paper was still in her hands. That simple drawing. That impossible beginning. Evelyn took a slow breath, then closed the car door without getting in. Instead, she walked back across the pavement, her steps quieter now, less defined by purpose and more by something she couldn't quite name. When she reached Lily, she knelt down, not caring about the ground, not caring about appearances. "Did you feel it again?" she asked softly. Lily looked up at her, her eyes bright in a way Evelyn hadn't seen in years. "Twice," she said. Evelyn's breath caught slightly, but she didn't let it show. "Not fully." "We'll come back tomorrow," she said, brushing a loose strand of hair from Lily's face. Lily nodded quickly. "They're coming too," she added, her voice carrying a quiet excitement that felt fragile but real. Evelyn glanced once more toward the street, where Daniel and Ethan had already disappeared into the darkness, unseen, uncelebrated, exactly the way they seemed to live. "I know," she said softly. The wind moved through the empty lot, carrying the last traces of the evening away, and for a moment, everything felt still, like the world itself was waiting. And somewhere in that stillness, a shift had already begun, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable, the kind that didn't need permission, didn't ask for attention. It simply grew, quietly, where dignity and belief had been planted. "The next morning always tells the truth," Daniel said softly as the first light of dawn stretched across the quiet street, pale gold slipping between buildings and resting gently on the worn sidewalk, where he and Ethan walked side by side, earlier than most, just like they always were, because some things deserved a quiet beginning before the world had a chance to interrupt. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of fresh coffee from a nearby diner and the distant hum of early traffic, but neither of them spoke at first, their footsteps steady, familiar, like a rhythm they had built over years of showing up for each other without needing to say why. Ethan adjusted the small notebook tucked under his arm, flipping it open briefly as they walked. "Day 1, he said quietly, almost to himself, as he scribbled something down. Daniel glanced over, a faint smile touching his face. "You already writing it?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "If we don't start it, it doesn't count," he replied simply. Daniel let out a soft breath, something between a chuckle and a sigh, not because it was funny, but because it was true. As they turned the corner toward the community center, they saw the SUV already there, parked in the same spot, engine off this time. No barrier between inside and out, just presence. Evelyn stood beside it, her posture different now, less guarded, more grounded, and beside her, Lily sat in her wheelchair, the folded paper still in her hands. But this time, her fingers weren't holding it like something fragile, they were holding it like something hers. When she saw them, her face lit up, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough to change the morning. Daniel slowed his steps, not to delay, but to meet the moment as it was, and Ethan stepped slightly ahead, lifting the notebook. "We're ready," he said. Lily smiled. "Me too." The world around them was still waking up, the city stretching into motion, unaware of what was happening in that small space, unaware that something quiet and powerful had already begun. Daniel knelt again, just like before, steady, present, his voice calm. "One small thing," he reminded her. "That's all it takes." Lily nodded, her focus returning, her breath steadying, and this time, when she looked down, there was less doubt, more intention. Seconds passed, then movement, not just a twitch, a clearer response. Small, but stronger. Ethan's pen paused midair, his eyes lifting, a faint smile forming. Evelyn didn't speak, didn't move, but something inside her shifted in a way no boardroom victory had ever managed to touch. Daniel simply nodded, just like before, no celebration, no disbelief, just recognition. "There it is," he said quietly. And in that moment, no one laughed. No one questioned. No one interrupted. The space held something rare. Silence. Not empty, but full. Full of understanding, of respect, of something earned, not given. Later, as the morning carried on and the world grew louder again, Daniel and Ethan began to walk back the way they came. The notebook now holding more than just words, holding proof of something small that mattered. Ethan looked up at his father. "We'll come back tomorrow?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "Yeah," he said. "We will." They walked on, side by side, their shadows stretching long in the rising sun, not noticed by most, not celebrated, but unchanged in what they chose to be. Quiet, steady, present. And maybe that's where the real miracle lived, not in the moment everyone could see, but in the ones no one stayed long enough to understand. So let me ask you something, as you watch this story unfold. In a world that moves fast and measures loud, would you still choose to show up quietly, again and again, even if no one noticed at first? And if you believe in dignity, in second chances, and in the quiet kind of strength that changes lives, take a moment to subscribe, because stories like this don't just remind us what's possible, they remind us who we can choose to be.